in the Western Sahara Desert of Mauritania called the Richat structure. It's also commonly referred to as the Eye of the Sahara.
Deep beneath the sands of the Sahara Desert, scientists have discovered an ancient structure visible from space. This discovery might finally shed light on the history that has intrigued experts for years. Long a subject of fascination and heated debates among archaeologists and scientists, this site has everyone on the edge of their seats, eager to find out what has been unearthed. Could it be the remains of ancient life? Join us as we unravel this mysterious desert and unveil the truth held within. Mega Lake. This dry and harsh area is known as one of the most dangerous places on Earth, but hidden beneath its sands are long-lost cities from a time when the Sahara was lush and full of life. The Sahara stretches across almost the entire northern part of Africa, covering about 3.5 million square miles. While its size is remarkable, what's buried under the sand is even more fascinating. Long ago, the Sahara was home to a huge lake in its western part, existing around 250,000 years ago. This ancient lake, hidden deep in the sand, was much larger than any body of water we see today. Back then, this region was covered with substantial bodies of water, as shown by scientific studies. The Nile River used to flow into an ancient area called Wadi Tushka in Egypt. At that time, the Sahara was inundated with a massive flood, creating a lake that was over 42,000 square miles in size, making it the second largest lake in the world. About 250 miles from the Nile's current location, scientists have discovered fossils of ancient fish buried in the Sahara's sands. This indicates how extensive the lake once was. Some ancient human remains have also been found in the same area, linking them to this giant lake. This enormous lake was likely crucial for our ancestors traveling through this arid land. For people to survive in such a desert, they needed a large oasis-like place to rest by the abundant waters. This lake would have been a key stopping point for those moving out of Africa. Without it, and the rivers that fed it, people might not have crossed into the Middle East and spread across the world. The discovery of this mega lake and evidence of early human activity suggests that the Sahara's past was much more vibrant than we might imagine. Beneath the sandy surface, there are also incredible human-made structures and objects. Recent findings show signs of human presence near the Richat structure, sparking fascinating possibilities about our ancient past. Next, let's explore the famous Eye of the Sahara, which could even be connected to myths like Atlantis. The Richat structure. The Richat structure, often called the Eye of the Sahara, is a noticeable round formation in the Adrar Plateau, deep within the Sahara Desert in Mauritania, near the town of Ouaddaine. The name Risha comes from a local word meaning feathers, and in Arabic, it's also known as tagense, which refers to the round opening of a leather pouch used to draw water from wells. This structure is an ancient geological dome that has been worn away over time, showing its interesting layers. It's about 40 kilometers wide, with layers of sedimentary rock arranged in circular patterns, almost like rings in a tree. Within these layers, you'll also find rocks formed from cooled magma, such as rhyolites and gabbros, which have been changed by heat and water. At the very center lies a mass of broken rocks known as a megabreccia. The Richat structure is not only a natural wonder, but also a valuable site for archaeologists. It holds a significant collection of ancient tools from the Acheulean period, which makes it an important site for studying early human history. Because of its scientific importance, the International Union of Geological Sciences, IUGS, has named it one of the top 100 geological heritage sites in the world. The structure itself is slightly oval-shaped, with its sedimentary rocks dating back as far as the late Proterozoic era in the center, to Ordovician sandstone around its edges. These rocks tilt outward at angles of 10 to 20 degrees, and because different types of rock wear away at different rates, the harder quartzite layers have created high circular ridges called cuestas. At the heart of the Richat structure lies a breccia, a mix of sharp, broken rock pieces, covering an area of at least 30 kilometers in diameter. Inside the Richat structure, you'll find a fascinating mix of volcanic and other fiery rocks, both those that erupted from the earth and those that formed underground. Among these rocks are rhyolitic volcanic rocks, gabbros, carbonatites, and kimberlites. The rhyolitic rocks come from ancient lava flows and changed volcanic ash, believed to be the remains of two volcanic craters called maars. These maars have worn away over time, but they once marked explosive volcanic activity. Mapping and various scientific studies, like magnetic and gravity surveys, show that the gabbroic rocks form two circular dikes or wall-like formations. The inner dike is about 30 meters wide and lies about 3 kilometers from the center of the Richat structure, while the outer one is 70 meters wide and is located 8 kilometers from the center. Within the structure, scientists have found 32 carbonatite dikes and sills. These are long, narrow formations, usually 300 meters long and 1 to 4 meters wide. The carbonatites, which lack the holes or bubbles often found in volcanic rocks, cooled between 94 and 104 million years ago. Additionally, a kimberlite plug, essentially a large cylindrical formation of kimberlite, and several sills have been found in the northern part of the structure. The kimberlite plug is about 99 million years old. These rocks suggest that a massive underground body of fiery rock lies beneath the Richat structure, formed as this magma pushed its way up and lifted the layers of rock above it. The Richat structure has some amazing hydrothermal features. These include a huge amount of change in rhyolites and gabbros due to hot, mineral-rich fluids, and a large central layer of broken rock formed by the same processes. This layer, called megabreccia, varies in thickness from about 40 meters in the center to just a few meters at the edges. It's made up of pieces of white to dark gray chert rock, sandstone rich in quartz, chert nodules, and limestone formed by ancient algae. The rock has been heavily silicified, meaning it's been transformed by silica. Scientists have found that this change happened roughly 98.2 million years ago, give or take 2.6 million years, using a dating method called 40R39R. The structure we're talking about was first noticed between the 1930s and 1940s and was called the Richat crater, or the Richat buttonhole. Richard Mollard in 1948 thought it was caused by a type of geological uplift called laccolithic uplift. In 1952, a geological team led by Theodore Monod explored Mauritania and found 4 areas with strange, round shapes, including Er Richat, Awelul, south of Chinguetti, Temimichat, Galaman, and Tenumer. Originally, it was believed that the Richat structure might have been created by a meteorite impact, like the other 3 locations. However, during the 1950s and 1960s, further studies suggested it might have been formed by natural earth processes instead. In the 1960s, scientists did extensive fieldwork and lab analysis, but they found no strong evidence of shock changes or other signs that would point to a high-speed extraterrestrial impact. Initially, a mineral called coesite, which indicates an impact, was thought to be present in the rocks from the structure. But in 1969, it was found that this mineral had been wrongly identified, and it was barite. Studies to determine the age of the structure were done in the 1990s, and later research by Matten and others in 2005 and 2008 concluded that it was not formed by a meteorite impact after all. When we dig deeper into the hidden layers below the surface, using techniques like aeromagnetic and gravimetric mapping, we find that the underlying structure was shaped by ring faults. These faults created ring-shaped dikes made of gabbroic rock, which formed around a massive body of magma. Over time, this led to the rising and eventual erosion of a dome structure due to intense hydrothermal activity in the fractured rocks below. As a result, alternating layers of hard and soft rock were left behind, and these layers eroded differently, eventually forming cuestas, sloped ridges with steep sides. The underlying alkaline igneous complex revealed by this erosion dates back to the Cretaceous period, which was millions of years ago. In October 2022, the International Union of Geological Sciences, IUGS, recognized the Richat structure as one of the top 100 geological heritage sites worldwide. This structure is noted for its impressive features as a magmatic, concentric alkaline complex, which means it's a striking example of certain geological formations created by magma. The IUGS considers these sites to be crucial for understanding Earth's geology. They define such a site as a key location with important geological features or processes that are significant for scientific study and have played a major role in the advancement of geological science throughout history. The Richat structure is a fascinating place where many Acheulean tools have been discovered. Acheulean sites, where these ancient tools were found, are located along dry riverbeds called wadis, which run along the outer edge of this circular structure. Even older stone tools from before the Acheulean period have also been found in these areas. These tools were made from quartzite, a type of rock that is common in the area. The most significant Acheulean sites, along with the quartzite outcrops, are located in the northwest part of the outer ring of the Richat structure. From here, Wadi Akardil flows east and Wadi Bamouer flows west. Some scattered Neolithic spear points and other artifacts have also been discovered, but they are not very common. Since Theodore Monod first discovered these sites in 1974, studies have shown that artifacts are generally missing from the inner parts of the Richat structure. No large trash heaps or man-made buildings have been found in the area, suggesting that the Richat structure was used mainly for short-term activities, like hunting and making stone tools. The rich collection of surface artifacts we see today is likely the result of wind and weather over many Ice Age cycles that have concentrated and mixed the tools. Artifacts are usually found in gravelly mud, muddy gravel, clayey sand, and silty sand that date from the late Pleistocene to the early Holocene. These materials are often redeposited, flattened, or both. They can become cemented into solid chunks or layers by a substance called calcrete. The ridges in this area are made up of old, weathered bedrock that used to be tropical soil from the Cenozoic era. The sediments from the Pleistocene to the Middle Holocene are found along wadis. In the inner parts of these depressions, the sediment layers are thin, ranging from a meter to less than a meter thick. In the outer parts of the wadis, the sediment layers can be 3 to 4 meters thick. The gravelly deposits are a mix of material from slopes, debris flows, and fast-moving water. The sandy deposits are made up of wind-blown sand and sediments from dry lake beds, which contain well-preserved freshwater fossils. Radiocarbon dating shows that most of these sediments formed between 15,000 and 8,000 years ago, during a wet period in Africa. These layers sit on top of old, eroded bedrock. The Richat structure, a fascinating geological formation, has sparked some unusual theories suggesting it might be the site of the legendary city of Atlantis, as described by the ancient philosopher Plato. This idea mainly comes from the fact that the Richat structure has a circular pattern that looks similar to Plato's description of Atlantis. However, most scholars think that Atlantis was just a made-up story created by Plato to illustrate a point, not a real place. Skeptic Stephen Novella has argued against the Atlantis theory, pointing out that the Richat structure doesn't match Plato's description, and there's no proof that any city was ever built there. Moving forward, we uncover the fictional island from ancient Greek stories by Plato. Atlantis. Atlantis, a fictional island from ancient Greek stories by Plato, is featured in his works Timaeus and Critias. Plato used Atlantis as a symbol to show the dangers of pride and overconfidence among nations. In his story, Atlantis is a powerful naval empire that controls all the lands to the west. It stands in contrast to the Achaemenid Empire, which was a real historical power. After a failed attempt to conquer ancient Athens, Atlantis loses favor with the gods and sinks into the Atlantic Ocean. Plato used this story to highlight Athens as an example of his ideal society, as described in his work, Republic. Although Atlantis is a small part of Plato's writings, It has had a big influence on literature. During the Renaissance, writers like Francis Bacon and Thomas More incorporated the idea of a perfect society inspired by Atlantis into their works, such as Bacon's New Atlantis and More's Utopia. However, in the 19th century, some amateur historians misunderstood Plato's story as factual history. Ignatius L. Donnelly, in his book Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, was particularly influential in this. Plato's vague references to events happening over 9,000 years before his time and the location beyond the Pillars of Hercules sparked a lot of speculative theories. Because of this, Atlantis has become a term used to describe any imagined advanced ancient civilization and continues to inspire modern stories, including comics and movies. Today, most experts in ancient languages and classical studies agree that the story of Atlantis is fictional. However, there's still debate about what might have inspired it. Plato often borrowed ideas and stories from older traditions, including the tale of Gyges. Because of this, some scholars think that the story of Atlantis might have been inspired by Egyptian records about the eruption of Thera, the invasion by the Sea Peoples, or the Trojan War. Others believe this theory is unlikely and argue that Plato created the story entirely from his imagination, possibly influenced by contemporary events like the failed Athenian invasion of Sicily in 415 to 413 BC, or the destruction of Helike in 373 BC. The only primary sources for the story of Atlantis are Plato's dialogues, Timaeus, and Critias. All other references to Atlantis come from these texts. Plato claimed that his story was based on information from Solon, who visited Egypt between 590 and 580 BC, and supposedly translated Egyptian records about Atlantis. Plato introduced the story of Atlantis in Timaeus, written around 360 BC. In these dialogues, four main characters discuss Atlantis: the politicians Critias and Hermocrates, and the philosophers Socrates and Timaeus. However, only Critias talks about Atlantis. Plato uses the Socratic method to explore different viewpoints within the context of a hypothetical discussion. The dialogue Timaeus starts with an introduction and then describes the creation and structure of the universe and ancient civilizations. Socrates reflects on the idea of a perfect society, as described in Plato's earlier work, The Republic. He wonders if there might be a historical story that represents such a society. Critias then mentions a story he considers historical, which he believes is the perfect example of this ideal society. He describes Atlantis in Critias, portraying ancient Athens as the model perfect society, and Atlantis as its opposite. According to Critias, the ancient Greek gods divided the land among themselves, and Poseidon was given the island of Atlantis. Atlantis was said to be larger than both ancient Libya and Asia Minor combined. However, it was eventually submerged by an earthquake, becoming an impassable mudflat that blocked access to the ocean. Plato described Atlantis as an island with mountainous regions in the north and along the coast, and a great plain in the southern part, stretching about 555 kilometers in one direction and 370 kilometers across the center. A mountain, 9 kilometers from the coast, was low all around, and the central island was about 0.92 kilometers in diameter. In Plato's imaginative story, Poseidon, the god of the sea, fell in love with Cleito, who was the daughter of Evenor and Leucippe. Cleito gave birth to 10 children, 5 pairs of twins. The eldest, Atlas, was named the ruler of the whole island and the surrounding ocean, which was later called the Atlantic Ocean after him. Atlas received the mountain where he was born, and the lands around it as his domain. His twin brother, Gadarus, also known as Eumelus, was given control of the island's far end, near the Pillars of Hercules. The other 4 pairs of twins, Ampheres and Evaemon, Menecius and Autochthon, Elisippus and Mestor, and Azais and Diaprepes, were also given significant lands and authority over many people. Poseidon turned the mountain where Cleito lived into a grand palace, surrounded by 3 large circular moats. These moats were separated by rings of land, and each ring was bigger than the one before it. The Atlanteans built bridges from the mountain to the rest of the island and dug a large canal to the sea. They created tunnels in the rock rings to allow ships to reach the city around the mountain and built docks from the rock walls. Each entrance to the city was protected by gates and towers, and there was a wall around each ring of the city. The walls were made of red, white, and black rock, covered with brass, tin, and a special metal called orichalcum. Critias, a character in Plato's dialogues, wrote that 9,000 years before his time, there was a war between the people living beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, and those within them. The Atlanteans had conquered parts of Libya up to Egypt and parts of Europe up to Tyrrhenia, enslaving the people there. The Athenians led a coalition to fight against the Atlantean Empire, and eventually, after the coalition fell apart, the Athenians managed to defeat the Atlanteans and free the occupied lands. The ancient writer Hellanicus of Lesbos wrote a work called Atlantis, of which only a few pieces remain. His work seemed to be about the genealogy of Atlas's daughters, but some believe it might be related to Plato's Atlantis. John Witt-Luce points out that Plato's descriptions of Atlantis's rulers are similar to Hellanicus's style, suggesting a connection between the two. Rodney Castleton thinks Plato might have borrowed the name Atlantis from Hellanicus, who might have based his work on an earlier story about the island. Castleton also notes that when Plato wrote about Atlantis in 359 BC, he had just returned to Athens from Sicily. He observed that the layout and fortifications of Syracuse were similar to Plato's description of Atlantis. Gunnar Rudberg was the first to suggest that Plato's ideas about Atlantis might have been influenced by his experiences in Syracuse. Some ancient writers thought Atlantis was a made-up story or a metaphor, while others believed it was real. Aristotle, Plato's teacher, thought Plato invented the island to illustrate his philosophical ideas. On the other hand, Crantor, a student of Plato's student Xenocrates, is often cited as believing that the Atlantis story was historical. Although Crantor's commentary on Timaeus is lost, Proclus, a later philosopher, refers to it. Proclus's account has led to debate about whether Crantor visited Egypt, spoke with priests, and saw inscriptions supporting Plato's story, or if he learned about it from others who had been to Egypt. The ambiguity in Proclus's text about whether he refers to Crantor or Plato continues to be a topic of debate. Alan Cameron suggests that the pronoun in question should be understood as referring to Plato. He argues that when Proclus says, "We must remember about this whole feat of the Athenians, that it is neither a simple myth nor plain history, although some take it as history and others as myth," he is just dismissing Crantor's view as merely a personal opinion. Proclus treats Crantor's view as representing one of two extreme and unacceptable positions. Cameron also points out that whether Proclus is referring to Plato or Crantor, it does not support theories like Otto Muck's claim that Crantor visited the temple of Neith in Sais and saw a column covered in hieroglyphs detailing Atlantis. Similarly, it doesn't support J.V. Luce's idea that Crantor sent a special inquiry to Egypt and might just be referencing Plato's statements. Proclus's commentary on the Timaeus also describes Atlantis's geography. According to some authors who studied the Outer Sea, there were 7 islands dedicated to Persephone and 3 very large islands, one sacred to Hades, another to Ammon, and the third to Poseidon. The largest of these was 1,000 stadia across. These authors claim that the memory of Atlantis, which had once ruled over all the islands in the Atlantic and was also sacred to Poseidon, was preserved by its inhabitants. Marcellus wrote about this in his Ethiopica, though we don't know much about Marcellus. Strabo and Posidonius, other ancient historians and philosophers, also believed in Atlantis's existence. Some have suggested that before the 6th century BC, the Pillars of Hercules might have referred to mountains on either side of the Gulf of Laconia, which could have been part of a pillar cult in the Aegean. These mountains are located at the southernmost gulf in Greece, opening into the Mediterranean Sea. If true, this would place Atlantis in the Mediterranean, supporting various details in Plato's description. The 4th century historian Ammianus Marcellinus, drawing on a now-lost work by Timagenes from the 1st century BC, mentions that the Druids of Gaul believed some of Gaul's inhabitants had migrated from distant islands. Some interpret this as suggesting that people from Atlantis fled to Western Europe when their land sank. But Ammianus says that some Druids remembered that part of the population was native, while others came from islands and lands north of the Rhine, not from the Atlantic Ocean. In the early 1st century, the Hellenistic Jewish philosopher Philo wrote about Atlantis's destruction in his work On the Eternity of the World, supposedly citing Theophrastus, Aristotle's successor. Joseph Barber Lightfoot noted that Clement might be referring to a known but hard-to-reach land beyond the Pillars of Hercules or an unknown land in the far west, similar to Plato's Atlantis. Early Christian writers had mixed views on Atlantis. Tertullian believed it was real and described it as being equal in size to Libya or Asia. Arnobius also thought it was real, but attributed its destruction to pagans. In the 6th century, Cosmas Indicopleostis wrote about Atlantis in his Christian topography to support his theory that the world was flat and surrounded by water. Modern interpretations of Atlantis began in the 16th century, when scholars started identifying it with the New World. Francisco López de Gomara was among the first to suggest that Plato was referring to America. Later, thinkers like Francis Bacon and Alexander von Humboldt also supported this idea. Janus Joannes Burcherod claimed in 1663 that the New World was not new, and Athanasius Kircher described Atlantis as a small continent in the Atlantic Ocean. Today's views on Atlantis often link it to Mayanism, originating from European encounters with the Americas, which led to apocalyptic and utopian visions inspiring future theorists. Most modern interpretations are considered pseudo-history or pseudoscience because they present their ideas as academic or scientific but do not meet rigorous standards. The Flemish cartographer Abraham Ortelius, in his 1596 Thesaurus Geographicus, was one of the first to suggest that continents were once joined and then drifted apart. He speculated that the island of Gades, Cadiz, might be a remnant of Atlantis, which he thought was torn away from Europe and Africa by earthquakes and floods. And he argued that Plato's account of Atlantis might not be just a story. The idea of Atlantis being located in the Atlantic Ocean is intriguing, especially because its name sounds so similar to Atlantic. Popular stories often place Atlantis there, keeping with the idea from ancient texts. Some believe the Canary and Madeira Islands, which are west of the Straits of Gibraltar and close to the Mediterranean Sea, could be where Atlantis was. However, studies show these islands have been rising for millions of years without sinking, due to geological forces like erosion and volcanic activity. Other potential sites include the Azores, an area known for volcanic activity because of rifting along the Azores Triple Junction. This region has been a plateau underwater for millions of years, with frequent volcanic and seismic events. The island's volcanic activity, particularly along the Tercera Rift, has been significant, with around 30 eruptions and many earthquakes since the 15th century. São Miguel, part of the Azores, hosts the Sete Cidades volcano, a remnant of this activity. Some have suggested the sunken island of Spartel, near the Strait of Gibraltar, as a location for Atlantis. Other theories place Atlantis in northern Europe, such as Doggerland in the North Sea or Sweden, which were submerged by a huge tsunami around 6100 BC. The Celtic Shelf and Ireland have also been proposed. In 2004, Swedish researcher Ulf Erlingsson suggested that the Atlantis story might be based on Stone Age Ireland, though he later admitted he didn't believe Atlantis existed. His theory about Ireland's geography being similar to Atlantis was dismissed by archaeologists. In 2011, a team led by Professor Richard Freund from the University of Hartford claimed to have found possible evidence of Atlantis in southwestern Andalusia within the marshlands of Doñana National Park. They speculated that a tsunami destroyed Atlantis based on earlier Spanish research. However, Spanish scientists criticized Freund for sensationalizing their work, and anthropologist Juan Villarreal Robles described his claims as fanciful. German researcher Rainer W. Kuhne had previously suggested using satellite images to place Atlantis in the Marismas de Hinojos, north of Cadiz. Historian Adolf Schulten had argued in the 1920s that Plato's Atlantis might be based on the real place of Tartessos. Some writers have even proposed Antarctica, the Caribbean, or the Bahamas as the location of Atlantis. The Pacific and Indian Oceans, including Indonesia, have also been considered. Stories of a lost continent off India, called Kumari Kandam, have been compared to Atlantis. Plato claimed that the Atlantis story came from Egypt, passed down through generations, and eventually reached Critias, a character in his dialogues. According to Plato, Solon tried to turn the story into a poem, but it was never finished. Modern scholars doubt this poem's existence and believe Plato might have invented the Atlantis tale himself. The next discovery in the desert is even more shocking. Roman ruins. Hidden deep in the desert are some surprising ruins of ancient Roman buildings. If you venture far into the sands and dig deep enough, you might uncover the remains of Thamagati, a once important Roman outpost. Also known as Timgad and Tamugas, this ancient city was built around 100 CE in what is now Algeria, under the orders of Emperor Trajan. Emperor Trajan was a major player in expanding the Roman Empire's military reach. Thamagati, which reached a population of 15,000 by the 3rd century CE, was considered one of the most beautiful cities in the Roman world. It boasted impressive features, including a grand triumphal arch, a large amphitheater, a well-stocked library, and more than a dozen Roman-style bathhouses. Its intricate mosaics were as stunning as those found in Pompeii. Roman soldiers and veterans lived in Thamagati, helping protect the empire's southern borders and managing important grain production. Despite their efforts, the city was frequently attacked by invaders and vandals. In 430 CE, a devastating assault left Thamagati in ruins, and it never regained its former glory. By the 8th century, it was completely abandoned. In the 18th century, the Sahara Desert's secrets were revealed thanks to two notable men, Scottish nobleman James Bruce and Florentine artist Luigi Balugani. They embarked on a bold journey to explore the desert and find the remains of old civilizations. By December 12, 1765, they had already found some ancient Roman ruins. The next day, they came across what they thought were the remains of the lost Roman city of Thamagati. Their guess was correct, and they became the first Europeans to reach this place in centuries. James Bruce wrote in his diaries that Thamagati was a small town, but had many beautiful buildings. Meanwhile, Luigi Balugani drew detailed pictures of what they saw. The city, buried under the sand, was surprisingly well preserved. In 1881, the French took control of these ruins and started major excavations because of their colonial interests. Many years later, in 1982, UNESCO recognized Thamagati as a World Heritage Site. Unlike most Roman cities that are buried under modern developments, Thamagati's ruins are among the best preserved Roman remains in North Africa. Even though the Sahara seems far from Rome, the northern parts of the desert have remnants of Roman walls and fortifications. These are part of a defensive line known as the African Limes, which some believe stretched over 450 miles to protect the southern border of the Roman Empire. Rome's influence extended deep into Africa and across the Mediterranean. This southern border was important for trading goods brought by caravans crossing the Sahara, including exotic animals like lions, elephants, jackals, ostriches, hyenas, cheetahs, and panthers.